Hello everyone, today I wanted to make a video highlighting some of the mods available on the VoronUsers repository. There are a ton of mods available, so if you have something specific in mind, chances are someone already built that mod and it's available there, so I do recommend you to check out the repository itself. This is the link to the repository, and this website just makes life easier for browsing, so I'll link both in the description below. And yeah, you can see the original list here. There are a ton of mods available on the repository, and even more than the stuff available here, there's also the legacy printer mods repository as well, with many more mods available here as well. Now, the legacy printer mods are obviously designed for older Vorons, as the name suggests, but all of the mods designed for older Vorons still work with the newer Vorons. It's just that the author of the mod didn't move it to the new folder, and yeah, that's basically it. But all of them, as I said, work with the newer Vorons as well. Now, this website, fake.org/VoronMods, ignore this bit, combines both of these pages into a single browsable thing here. It pulls the picture, I guess the first picture, I'm guessing though, and from the readme or maybe the folder structure, I don't know. But yeah, it means you can see what the mod is if there is a picture available with the mod, and the description and the name as well. And on top of all of that, you can filter for your printer here. So for example, you want a Voron switchwire mod, and there we go. You can see all the mods that work with Voron switchwire, and that's based on what the author selected here with these check marks or crosses. So if the author thinks it will work with the Voron switchwire, it will be filtered here. So I'll link the repository, the legacy, and this website in the description below. But keep in mind, this website isn't an official page, it's by someone in the server. So yeah, that's, I think, worth pointing out. But if you click on a mod here, as you can see, it opens the page in the GitHub repository. So, you know, it's safe, but yeah, still keep in mind this is not official, I guess, but I know many people use this page, so I know it works well. So anyway, let's start with some of the mods that I want to show, and I'm going to start with the Klicky Probe. Klicky Probe by this guy. It's a replacement for the PL08 or the Omron probe we use on most of the Vorons for the bed leveling. Now, those probes work relatively well for bed leveling, but they don't work well with some magnet setups, and they don't work well in high temperature environments. They drift with temperature, and as you go higher and higher, their readings become less and less reliable, I guess. Not accurate, but reliable, I think. And that's a problem with those. And plus, if you're like me, and I think most people are, you're probably going to buy them from China because it's much cheaper. But that also means you're probably going to get a fake, and sometimes those don't work well and you have to buy another one. That happened to me when I was building my Voron 2.2. I bought the PL08 and it didn't work well, so I had to buy the Omron. So yeah, there are problems with that as well. Whereas this, it uses the standard micro switch we use for the limit switches on, I think, all Vorons, and yeah, that's obviously much more reliable and it shouldn't drift to temperature, etc, etc. The problem with that normally is the probe. If it's a mechanical one like this, obviously it has to be below the nozzle, and yeah, that obviously interferes with printing when you start printing. But if you figure out a way to dock and undock that, that's not a problem anymore, and that's what this mod is. So what you're seeing here is the dock for the Klicky Probe, and this mounts to the back extrusion between the A and B drives, and it holds the probe as the name suggests. It docks it there, and when you want to measure the distance to the bed, it undocks and connects to the tool head. You do your measuring and then dock it back here and start your printing. That's how this works. And yeah, this is a very simple mod actually. It is actually cheaper than the probes themselves as well, and it doesn't even require soldering. It's that simple. And yeah, just make sure you have contact with the magnets and leads of the switch and the cables. So this is a really great mod in my opinion, and honestly, if I was building a Voron today from scratch, this is probably the probe I would consider the most. I know many people built this and it works well for them, so I'm sure it will work well for other people as well, but I haven't tested this, so I guess keep that in mind. But I don't expect to I don't expect you to have any problems if you build this probe. So yeah, this is a very interesting one. I'm not going to link every single mod I talk about in the description, because that list would be ridiculously long, but yeah, I already linked the repository, so you can find the Klicky Probe there, and this is from the list or the author's name, or you can even search on the fake.org site or with Control F on the repository if you want to just search for what it is, and you can see the exact name here. Now moving on, there are some mods I want to show for a better layer fan cooling. With the actual the stock afterburner, the cooling of that with the 4020 fan for the part layer fan or part fan, whatever you call it, it actually works really well for ABS, but it's not enough with materials that require better cooling. Even with PLA, it's sometimes not enough, so many people designed new versions of that, and the most popular one is by Bad Noob. ABBN30 is his current mod. Fun fact, this used to be called Bad Dragon back in the day. He changed it obviously, but yeah, this is how it looks like. It uses a 5015 fan here and a much improved air path design to the part you want to cool. So the duct itself here is actually different. And yeah, I'm using a variation of this. The actual air path is exactly the same, just the fan mount is slightly different on mine, and it works really well, so I can definitely recommend this mod. Now personally, I'm not a big fan of the current looks of this fan mount on the front. The orange one kind of looks like Kenny, I guess, so that's kind of funny, but yeah, when I look at this I see Teletubbies, and yeah, it's not great, but yeah, it works really well, and that's the most important thing. So again, this is a great mod you can use if you want better cooling. Yeah, I agree with that. Anyway, you can find it in the repository, as I said, Bad Noob's mod, you can find it there. If you want better cooling than this, well, there is also the design by, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, but Loudol. It uses two 5015 fans instead of one. It doesn't change the air path like the Bad Noob's design does, so it uses the stock duct for the air path that's used on the afterburner, but two fans, even with less optimal air path, should be better than one, and it also looks kind of interesting. So this is a good option if you want even more cooling, but Bad Noob's 5015 with a single fan is more than enough in my opinion, but this is an option if you don't think this is enough. Another option with two fans is the Mantis, and yeah, you can see how this looks. This is not an afterburner anymore, it gets rid of that tool head completely, and one advantage of that is the reduced weight. The afterburner looks great and works really well in my opinion, but one disadvantage it has is the weight. Afterburner is kinda heavy. Now I feel like it doesn't matter anymore these days, the weight of the tool head. Obviously I'm not going to attach a brick to the tool head and test it, but a few grams doesn't really matter in my opinion these days. And I think this uses a Sherpa extruder instead of the afterburner Clockwork, since this is not an afterburner anymore. But yeah, I know many people built this and I know it works well for them, so this is another option, and it's by Long, and you can find it in the repository, as I said, just like the rest of the mods. Now moving on, there are the C920 camera mounts that I want to show. In my opinion, for a Voron, if you want a camera, the best camera you can use is the C920. There are better cameras in terms of just the video quality, but they're more expensive. And there are cheaper cameras, but they don't produce the best picture, so I feel like a C920 is basically the best balance, bang for buck, and it's also a very popular camera, so there are many mounts available for it. And personally, I'm using this mount by Film. Now this is in the legacy printer modes if you want to find it, and it works well for me. I initially built this mount by, well, this is one of the devs, but yeah, anyway, and yeah, I guess it works well for him, but I couldn't make it work well. I couldn't align the camera properly and actually get a full picture of the bed. I don't know if that was my fault or what, but yeah, I can't really get a good picture of the bed with this mount, so I had to go with the Phil's design. But nowadays there is also this option by Koyos, and yeah, you can see that it gets a good picture of the bed, and this is how that works. It just spaces out the camera to the front. The problem with this design is you can't rotate the camera to the bed. Yeah, I think nowadays this is probably the best option you can use, since you can angle the camera properly with this, but I'm using Phil's mounts as I already printed it and it works well. And yeah, you can find them in the repositories, as I said. If you want to use a C920 on the Voron Zero, obviously you can't use the same mounts, but there is this design that mounts to the top hat for the Voron Zero, and there isn't a picture of the feet from the camera on this page, but based on what I've seen, it also gets a decent picture of the bed. So if you want to use a C920 on the Voron Zero, this is a pretty good option, and yeah, you can find it in the repository again by Koyos. Now what I'm using personally is the Raspberry Pi camera. My design, this is mine, XPSD if you don't know, available on the repository as I said, uses a ball system and the Raspberry Pi camera. The Raspberry Pi camera is cheaper and smaller, which means it works well with the Voron Zero, but there are a lot of disadvantages with the Raspberry Pi camera as well. The color and the picture quality in general and the resolution, it's not great. It can't really get a great picture from the camera, and then you also have to deal with this ribbon cable, which is really annoying. But if you want to save some money, you can use the Raspberry Pi camera if you wish. You can do the same on the Voron 2 as well, but I don't think a mount exists for that on the repository, so I didn't open a page for that. But I don't know, maybe there is and I skipped it, I don't know. But as I said, normally even for the Voron Zero, I'd recommend the C920 because it looks much better, and it's a relatively cheap and widely available camera that's used by many people. It works really well, so yeah, that's the one I'd recommend. Now moving on, there are some improvements that I can recommend for the hinges. Now in my experience, the VHP tape or any other 3M tape I tried for the hinges, for the panels of the doors, that is, they don't work that well. I mean, some people say VHP works really well, so your mileage may vary, but my experience, that doesn't work really well, and I had a lot of problems, and I ended up building Randall's design for the hinges here. And his design uses screws to attach to the outer piece, and you obviously have to drill the acrylic to do this. There are threaded inserts on this piece. Drilling the acrylic is pretty easy in my opinion actually, but you have to be careful. Acrylic likes to crack, so you need to be careful when doing that. What I found is the best way to do this is basically sandwich the acrylic between two wood blocks or something like that. And when drilling, don't apply any pressure to the drill you're using, just let it sit there on its own weight, and it will carve the path for the screw very easily that way, and it shouldn't crack. And yeah, that's the way I found it. And make sure you use the correct drill bit size from the start. Definitely don't try to expand the size of the hole if you didn't drill it in the correct place. Just drill a new one, because if you try to expand the hole like you do on metal and wood, it works metal and wood. With acrylic you're going to crack it. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. And if you can do that, the Randall's design works really well. But now there's also an improved design here, and this means this lets you open the door completely to the side. So yeah, if you want to build a hinge, I'd recommend this nowadays over Randall's design, but Randall's design is mentioned a few times here, so it's probably based on that. So yeah, both are great, but I'd say 270-degree opening is a better idea nowadays. Now if you want something similar like this for the Voron Zero, there is a mod I designed. It's basically the same idea: drill the acrylic, use threaded inserts and M3 screws, and yeah, same idea. And you can find it here. I wish I included some pictures on the page here, I didn't, but yeah, as I said, it's the same idea, so you can find it on the repository. Moving on, there are some mods I want to recommend for the Voron Zero specifically. The biggest problem with the Voron Zero assembly is the lack of T-nuts. Since the Voron Zero uses 1515 extrusions, you can't use the regular 2020 extrusion T-nuts when building a Voron Zero, and you have to use hex nuts or square nuts for the M3 screws, and You have to preload them when the end of the extrusion is open, and they slide around everywhere, and they're a pain to align, and they fall out, etc. And that's honestly, I'd say, the most annoying thing about building a Voron Zero. But there are mods to combat this to some extent. This mod lets you preload the nuts and they stay in place when building the bed assembly by Zirancho, and yeah, basically you put the hex nut in there and insert the part to the bed frame, and makes life much easier when assembling the bed, which I'd argue is the most difficult part based on at least problems based on the problems that's caused by this issue. So this is a really useful mod, and I know many people use this, so I know it works well. Now there's this mod that I found. I don't know anyone who actually used this, but in theory anyway, this should be even better than Zirancho's idea, because Zirancho's one only works for the bed assembly. This, on the other hand, lets you use square nuts or hex nuts as T-nuts, and they stay in place anywhere you want. For example, the back panel is also a pain to attach, so for example, for that, this should work. As I said, I don't know anyone that actually used this, but should work at least in theory, so this is also a great idea. And yeah, it's by Zen3D. Again, you can find it in the repository. And there's also this mod that I really like for the Voron Zero. It's a top hat design by HardK. Again, you can find it in the repository. And it's hinged, it's based on extrusions. This is, in my opinion, a much better design than the stock top hat. But it's obviously more expensive, so I understand why the devs didn't design something like this. But I actually really want to build this for my Voron Zero, but unfortunately you do need specific lengths of 50-15 extrusions, ones that are not covered by the LDO kit for the 15-15 extrusions for the Voron Zero, so you need to get them separately. If you have access to Misumi, you can get them from them, I think, but if you don't, well, you need to buy the LDO kit or something and cut them to size, and I don't want to cut extrusions. I'm really bad at that, and that's the reason I haven't built this yet, but I don't know, someday I might try it. And yeah, this is a really nice mod in my opinion. I kinda want it. And yeah, another reason I don't go through Misumi is, yeah, I can import it through other methods, but then the color won't match because I'm using red extrusions on my Voron Zero. So yeah, but in my opinion, this is a great mod. So yeah, if you are willing to do that, you can find it in the repository. And moving on, skirt buttons. This is something I really like on my Voron builds. I did it on my Voron 0.0 and I did it on my Voron 2.4. I will do it eventually on my 0.1. So I'm upgrading the 0.0 to 0.1 and I got rid of them temporarily, but I will eventually redo it. But yeah, this is the idea. This is by Meteo, this one. It's for the Voron 2.2, and as a result it's only available in the legacy printers mod, legacy printers folder. It uses Cherry MX switches or same form factor switches. You can use whatever brand you want, obviously. The reason I don't like this design personally is because these keyboard switches are really expensive, but if you're willing to pay that, they actually feel much nicer than tactile switches, and they have LEDs built in, so yeah, they have their advantage as well. So you can find the Meteo design in the legacy printer mods. As I said, I don't know if there is this version available for the newer Vorons, but I couldn't find it, but it might be worth searching for. What I'm using is, I'm using these tactile switches. They still feel pretty nice and they work well with the skirts. I use these buttons to preheat the printer, pause the print, swap filament, etc. It just makes life easier, more home the printer. Yeah, I have 12 of them on my Voron 2.4, so yeah, I use them for many functions, but yeah, they work really well. And I have a similar mod for the Voron Zero as well. Unfortunately, again, looks like I don't have a picture of that, but it's available here. But you should keep in mind that this also includes the OLED display mount for the Voron Zero, so if you don't want to use the specific OLED display I linked, then yeah, this is not a great idea for you, but yeah, they work well if you want to. And uses tactile switches just like this one, but small ones for the Voron Zero, obviously. And one more thing I wanted to show from the legacy printer mods, which could be moved to the regular printer modes if you ask my opinion, as the load cell spool holder. This lets you measure the weight of the filament that's remaining on your spool, and based on that you can, for example, if you want to start a big print, you can check the remaining weight on the spool and deduct the tear of the empty spool and figure out how much filament you have left, and based on that you can start your large print or not. You can also probably figure out a way to program this to pause your print when it's running low, but honestly for that I'd recommend the filament sensor, but it's still an option. Now I don't know if there's a way to use this with mainsail or whatever, but it works with Octoprint, and yeah, you can find details here. I don't use this mod personally, but yeah, it should work fine for you. So yeah, it's here in the legacy printer folder if you're interested in this. Now I want to move on to some larger mod projects that I know, and I'm going to start with the Enrage Rabbit project by Ete. I'll link this in the description below since this is a different repository. This is a MMU2 type of a unit, lets you print with multiple filaments. It's great for multicolor prints, and you can see a decent, pretty good print quality here. And yeah, it works well for many people. I'm in the process of building mine. Well, actually I built mine, but need to make it work. But I need to make it work with firmware, etc. But yeah, this is the unit. It basically works the same way that the MMU2 does, but the difference is it uses a servo, kind of like the SMUF, to select the filament instead of that big rolling thing based with a stepper motor. And yeah, many people built this, many people had luck with this, so it works well. And the repository also includes a filament buffer as well, which is kind of important. So yeah, you can find that here as well. And a bunch of user modes. I didn't go through these yet, but yeah, I'm sure there's something useful in here. So again, I'll link the repository in the description below. Another interesting mode is the Doom Cube. I already built one Doom Cube for my Voron 2.4, and I'm building a similar idea, tiny as well, based on Doom Cube idea. And what this does is it lets you insulate your Voron 2.4, and yeah, that means you can print higher temperature materials, not crazily high temperature materials like PEEK or PEC or whatever, but you know, somewhere in between. And even with ABS, it means it will work better, it will insulate better, which means less temperature fluctuations and higher chamber temperature, which again helps. So yeah, it works well for many purposes, and it's also a great looking mod. It doesn't look like there's a picture of that here, Doom Cube here, but it looks great. It also moves the electronics chamber to the top and keeps the power supplies on the bottom, which means that you have separate chambers for them, high temperature and low temperature, which is a nice safety feature, and gives you more space for activities as well. So yeah, it's a great mod. I'll recommend it, and I'll link it in the description below. And there's the on-desk Nevermore Air Filter. I'm in the process of building the largest one, the Nevermore Max, which is here, but there's also the Nevermore Micro. I don't think the Nevermore Mini is ready yet, but the Micro is, so if you want a smaller one, it's also available. And what this is for filtering the air. Well, obviously, as the name suggests, it uses HEPA filters, active carbon filters, and a pre-filter to filter the air with the Nevermore Max. I think the Micro only uses active carbon, and that's it. Yeah, but still should work well. And that's for getting rid of the harmful stuff that gets released to the air when 3D printing, especially if you're printing with ABS, or even there are much worse materials as well. And yeah, it lets you get rid of them. I've said this before, I don't think the stuff that's released to the air is too dangerous, but it also gives me headaches, which is the reason why I'm building mine. And yeah, even if you don't care about your health, you know, if you get headaches or whatever, or if you don't like the smell, they also smell, well, this is a good option you can build. And I'll link in the description below. It's on OnDesk's repository, but it's actually just VoronUsers. So eventually it will probably get merged to the VoronUsers repository as well. But right now it's on OnDesk's fork of that, so I'll link that in the description. And very quickly I'll mention this. This is not something I actually recommend you to build, but just to give you an idea of some of the more crazy mods you can do. This is a car hood style electronics chamber for the bottom electronics. I'm not using this anymore since I built the Doom Cube, but before that I was using this. It lets you reach the bottom electronics much easier than the this traditional method of turning your printer upside down and removing the bottom panel, and it also looks kind of cool. But honestly, there are some flaws with this design that I'd like to iron out, but even with those faults, it still works well. And as I said, I used this for a long time, it worked well. So if you're interested in this, it's on the VoronUsers repository, so you can find it there. And yeah, that's I guess all. Now there are also some PCBs designed by Voron dev team and the community itself that can be useful to some people. And the one that I like the most is the PT100 Stick. It lets you use a step 6 slot on your controller if you are using one that has step 6 slots. And yeah, that means you can use PT100 RTDs instead of just regular thermistors, which are less accurate than PT100. So I really like PT100, so I really like this PCB. I personally haven't used this, but I know many people have, and it works really well. And you can find these very easily on AliExpress. I'll link a few in the description below as well if you are interested in these. And you do need something like this for a PT100. For a PT1000 you don't, if you have a spider or something with a good resistor on the thermistor input. But for the PT100s, no matter what, you need a board like this or an external module. And I actually made a video about that, so I'll link that in the description below as well. But for most people, I'd recommend this. One thing you should keep in mind is make sure your step 6 slot supports SPI. If it supports older TMC drivers which were running on SPI, newer ones run on UART, it means it will support this as well. And another thing to keep in mind is the current version of this includes a 3.3 volt supply, so you can use it with boards that supply 5 volts to the driver. But the older versions of the step stick didn't, and they didn't work with the boards that supply 5 volts to the step 6 slot, like the Flymaker I think is one of them. But yeah, modern ones, the newer ones of the PT100 stick, they have the regulator, so that's not a problem anymore, and it creates its own 3.3 volts and it works well with that. So yeah, again, I'll link a few in the description below. I'll also link my video, and I also wrote the guide on the Voron docs for the step 6 for the PT100, so I'll link that in the description below as well. Now there is also this mod that I really like by Timmit. This is not on the Voron hardware repository, so I'll link this separately. But yeah, it lets you mount a PCB here. And it's just a breakout system. On the toolhead you mount this, again provides the breakout. My design, which if you're a viewer of this channel, you already saw that my design is based on this, but mine has a few other features that I will get to. I'll mention that as well later. But this is just a simple breakout. It replaces the cover piece plate here with a PCB and uses I think it's a 14-pin microfit to the toolhead, and then there's the breakout. So it's just a breakout PCB, but yeah, it's a really nice design in my opinion. So I really like this. I'll link it in the description below. And as I said, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know that I did something similar to this. Mine uses a 18-pin microfit connector instead of 14, but main advantage of my design is it generates its own 5 volt and 12 volt supplies, so you can run 12 volt fans, you can run 5 volt fans, and you can power your Raspberry Pi through that as well, which means you only need your 24 volt power supply, you don't need anything else. And yeah, I really like my design on that. It's available on my repository here, random PCBs. It's this one, Voron 0 new boards, and you can find the motor plate and the toolhead breakout here. And yeah, as I said, the idea is based on Timmit's design, but mine includes the buck converters. And I'd say that's the only PCB that I'd recommend you to build here. Well, maybe the ADXL345 MCU as well, actually. The ADXL345 MCU, I made a video about that before. It lets you connect an ADXL345 with just a USB cable, so you don't have to deal with flying wire SPI wires. It's just annoying. So yeah, it lets you do that. And I really like my version of that. But at the same time, something you need to keep in mind is with the component shortage that's going on right these days, it's kind of expensive. Like it would probably cost you like 50 to 60 bucks to build one of them these days. It was like 15 or 10 or something like that back then. So yeah, nowadays I wouldn't really recommend it, but once the component shortage is over, hopefully yeah, it's something you can consider building. And yeah, mine, as I said, works really well, and I made a video about how to program that as well, so I think I'll link that here. Yeah, I didn't, but I provided the information here. Anyway, yeah, it works well. So yeah, that's all the PCBs I wanted to show. Really quickly, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you might have noticed that I built a few mods that I haven't uploaded to the regular VoronUsers repository. For that, I have this mods repository of my own. This is a temporary place for mods to stay until they go wherever they belong, but yeah, well, they are in work in progress, or when I feel like it for one of the mods, this one, the spool holder, it's finished, but I just didn't move it. Yeah, you can find them here. The spool holder is a top-mounted spool holder for Voron 2.4. It's nothing special, but if you want a top-mounted one, there we go. And the Voron 0.1 panels, and the mods I designed for the Doom Cube, the installation covers and skirts, you can find them here. But I need to mention that except the spool holder one, they are all work in progress, and there are some things I need to improve with them, so you know, take them for what they're worth. They're not finished, but yeah, if you're interested in them, you can find them here. But that's it for this video. I hope you found some interesting notes that you'd like to build for your Voron if you're interested in them. And as I said, everything is linked in the description below. But that's it for this video, as I said, so hope you found it useful. If you did, please leave me a like down below, and thanks for watching. The usual outro.